Movements and shifts of the supply curve, part of our Week 3 lectures on supply. In this video, we're going to discuss what causes a movement along the supply curve and what causes shifts in the supply curve. Here is a supply curve for the supply of notebooks. And you can see, based on the price, we have different quantities. And it's sloping upward, so as the price increases, the quantity supplied also increases. This graph shows how the quantity supplied responds to the price of a good. We can choose a good that you consume and think about what else besides price could affect how much of that good a firm would produce. Go ahead and think about that for a few minutes. Think about if you can come up with some other things besides a change in price that would affect how much a firm produces. Some other factors might be that a firm adopts a new technology, that they produce things in a different way. It's also possible that the prices of ingredients, like what we would call inputs and factors of production, those also might change. So the wage rate might go up. The price of flour might go down. And also government regulation may change how much a firm supplies to the market. These other factors are not represented on our graph. Our graph is simply of price and quantity. None of these other factors come in. While we can think about a multidimensional graph that represents these factors, we can also just think about if it's a change in price, there's a movement along the supply curve, and if there's a change in any of these other factors, it's a shift in the supply curve. So we discussed the things that aren't price that might shift the supply curve. For instance, price does not shift the supply curve. We have movement along the supply curve. Also, things that primarily affect demand also do not shift the supply curve. These will shift the demand curve, and these demand curve shifts cause movement along the supply curve. So usually one curve shifts, and that causes movement along the other curve. So if price or demand isn't changing supply, then there's a shift in the supply curve. Again, we're going to shift left and right, although some people talk about up and down, and left is the same as down, and right is the same as up. An increase in supply is going to shift the supply curve right, and a decrease in supply is going to shift the supply curve left. So this is a lot like demand in this. So we said that a shift in supply will cause a movement along the demand curve, and a shift in demand will cause a movement along the supply curve once we put the demand and supply curves together, which we'll start doing next week. One of the things that's important for us as introductory students to recognize and be comfortable with is determining whether the supply curve or the demand curve shifts after a change in the market. This will eventually become easier for you, but for now you can ask yourself, what is primarily or originally or first affected by the change? In general, if consumers are affected, that's a shift in the demand curve, and if firms are affected, that's a shift in the supply curve. And that's how we can distinguish. Now, I'll give you 3 examples here. You can answer this in the participation area of Slack. Go ahead and give your best answer of which curve shifts and in which direction, left or right, the curve shifts. So, for example, if a new technology makes steel beams cheaper to produce, how does this affect the construction market? Or if the kiwi industry launches a large advertising campaign, how would this affect the kiwi market? Or the government imposes a tax on shipping packages. How would this affect the market for laptops? So go ahead and go to Slack and discuss which curve you think shifts and in what direction you think that curve shifts. So in summary, if the price changes, there's movement along the supply curve. If demand changes, there's movement along the supply curve. If anything else changes, there's a shift in the supply curve. And determining whether supply or the demand curve shifts is a skill that gets better with practice. Thank you.